Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for attending this webinar. We are going to start in just a minute or two as more people are still joining. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get going. I know some additional people are still logging on, but we want to respect everyone's time and start pretty promptly. So again, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for attending our Trees Update webinar. My name is Christine Nagerkurth, and I am part of the Art Secretariat team here at Windrock International. We are so excited that so many people were willing to join us today, and we are really looking forward to sharing the details of Trees 2.0 with you. So before I dive into the details, I just want to cover some webinar logistical issues. We will answer your questions at the end of the session after the presentation is completed. However, you are welcome to submit questions at any time by using the question feature at the bottom of the webinar screen. Please type in your question and submit it, and my colleague Jessica Arrigo is going to gather the questions so we can respond to them at the end. This webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the slides as well as the recording will be posted on the ART website. Great, so today we will be reviewing the key proposed updates and revisions to Trees 2.0. The main topics we will cover are Indigenous peoples, high forest low deforestation, removals, uncertainty, and double counting. We will also highlight areas where clarifications were made in the new draft, although we are not accepting comments on these sections during this consultation period. Finally, we will outline the process that will be followed to finalize Trees 2.0. The first update we would like to highlight today is the new eligibility criteria for participation of recognized Indigenous peoples. These criteria allow two pathways for participation. First, a national government submitting a subnational accounting area may now include recognized IP territories in the accounting area, as well as jurisdictions, providing greater flexibility. Second, Indigenous peoples that meet the scale threshold and have national government approval can become direct participants on their own. The scale threshold is in line with the existing subnational scale requirement, reflecting ART's immutable principle to require crediting at a large scale and to promote progress towards national scale accounting. The Secretariat welcomes and encourages feedback regarding these criteria. When Trees 1.0 was published, we indicated our intent to add a crediting level approach more suitable for high forest, low deforestation, or HFLD, participants, and an approach for crediting removals. To develop the approaches for both HFLD and removals crediting that are proposed in Trees 2.0, we followed the process that is outlined on the slide. This included recruiting experts for committees that assisted the Secretariat with identifying and evaluating numerous options for the approaches. The Secretariat then presented these options to the Art Board for its consideration. The Art Board directed the Secretariat to conduct soft consultations with countries to assess the workability of some of the proposed approaches. Following that consultation, the Art Board approved approaches ensuring the selected ones were in line with the art principles. The Secretariat then drafted the text for the Trees 2.0 consultation. We are really excited to share these updates with you today, and we look forward to your comments on the approaches. Based on discussions with the HFLD Expert Committee and our internal analyses, the static definition of HFLD that was in Trees 1.0 has been changed to a score with a threshold that must be exceeded. This allows greater flexibility and the inclusion of HFLD participants at different points in their fight against deforestation and degradation. The HFLD score is determined by adding two values, the percent forest cover and the deforestation rate. Any participant, national or subnational, whose combined score is greater than 0.5 qualifies as HFLD for their entire 5-year crediting period. Because HFLD participants have very low deforestation and degradation, the committee and Secretariat considered numerous ways to develop a robust crediting level. The proposed approach uses historical emissions data to develop a linear trend. The trend line is then extrapolated to determine the crediting level for each year of the crediting period. The Secretariat worked with a statistician to evaluate what requirements were appropriate for development of the trend line. Although some datasets may suggest a curve is a better fit, the requirement for a line is conservative. A key feature of the quantile regression approach is that results are less influenced by outliers than more common regression approaches. This allows all data points to be included in the analysis and prevents the evaluation of outliers, which can be subjective and difficult to objectively verify. To assist participants with applying the quantile regression approach and to ensure correct application, an easy-to-use tool is available on the ART website. The tool allows the participant to enter their emissions data and the desired crediting period. It then generates the trend line and extrapolates it to determine the crediting level for each year of the crediting period. The participant can generate reports in multiple formats, which feed into their calculation and provides an easily verifiable result. HFLD participants may also optionally claim credits for the foregone removals or foregone sequestration from areas that would have been deforested. When participants have reduced emissions below their crediting level, they are eligible to quantify credits from removals activities. Quantifying removals is optional, and participants are not required to do so. Currently, the scope for the removals approach includes only the conversion of non-forest land to forest. Removals associated with forest remaining forests are not included at this time due to issues related to additionality and setting a credible baseline. The Art Removals Committee and Secretariat evaluated numerous approaches and options. The Secretariat proposes an area-based crediting level for removals in Trees 2.0. The crediting level is determined by calculating the average area in hectares of commercial planting and natural restoration during the 5-year historical reference period. If stratification is possible and commercial planting and natural restoration can be tracked separately, participants may apply a zero baseline for natural restoration activities if desired. Crediting can be claimed for any areas of commercial planting and natural restoration in a given year of the crediting period that exceed the crediting level area. There is no penalty in cases where the area does not exceed the area of the crediting level. A removals factor section was added to the new public draft to include requirements that are unique to removals and thus differ from requirements for emissions factors. The earliest start date for removals crediting is consistent with other trees accounting for deforestation and degradation emissions, which is up to 4 years prior to the submittal of initial documentation to ART. In addition to the two new crediting level approaches, one additional area of change that we want to highlight is the approach for determining and applying an uncertainty deduction. In TREES 1.0, deductions for uncertainty were taken on the crediting level and annual emissions separately. At the time of publication of TREES 1.0, we stated that we would update this approach as new analyses and methods became available. Our new proposed approach focuses on the uncertainty of the calculated emissions reductions and removals value rather than the separate crediting level and annual emissions values. To develop this new approach, we worked with a REDD+ expert who recently drafted a paper that lays out a practical way of reducing overestimation risks that would be considered intolerable by market stakeholders. So rather than reporting and discounting for uncertainties associated with underreporting, which don't affect credibility or rigor, we now apply a risk tolerance level that only considers overreporting or estimation. This is done by applying a one-sided confidence interval and requiring conservative discounting based on a risk tolerance of overreporting. The risk tolerance level was recommended as it is conservative, while still allowing some flexibility for countries with higher uncertainties associated with degradation emissions. We also removed the 15% allowable uncertainty threshold, which gave participants the first 15% free. We now require conservative deductions at all uncertainty levels above 0 at a sliding scale. And finally, we added a new provision which allows participants to recalculate uncertainty at 5-year intervals and recoup deductions if uncertainty has decreased over time. The double counting section of TREES was updated to clarify how TREES addresses the avoidance of double claiming, recognizing that international requirements for corresponding adjustments to avoid double counting under the Paris Agreement, Article 6, are still being negotiated, that the infrastructure for countries to account for corresponding adjustments is not yet in place, that there will be a transition period for the Paris Agreement rules and infrastructure to be in place, and that corresponding adjustments may not be required for all potential agreements that our participants may enter into. Recognizing also that requirements for corresponding adjustments are clear for government-to-government transfers under Article 6.2 and for transfers for use in the ICAO CORSIA, the art registry has infrastructure already in place to facilitate the avoidance of double claiming for all transactions where accounting for international transfers may be required or preferred. This includes functionality to publish host country letters of authorization for transfers of TREES credits, to label TREES credits associated with the letter of authorization, as well as to label TREES credits for which a corresponding adjustment has been applied. In addition, Annex B was added to enable participants to adhere to specific requirements of ICAO's CORSIA. Several additional but minor changes were also made. These include adding a reference to removals and HFLD in the many sections of TREES to reflect these new approaches being included, changing the name of the unit to TREES credit throughout the document for consistency, removing the requirement for ex-ante projections of emission sources when justifying de minimis exclusions, as these estimates were difficult to make and verify with a reasonable level of accuracy and did not add value to the analysis. We changed the timing for conformance with the safeguards outcome indicators from 1 crediting period to 5 years. This reflects the original intent to allow all participants the same amount of time to implement their safeguards monitoring. We also modified the MRV requirements to include the requirements specific to CORSIA. As I mentioned earlier, TREES 2.0 also includes several clarifications which were made in response to questions we have received over the last year. While we are not accepting comments on these clarifications, we did want to summarize them during this webinar to bring them to your attention. The ART process for initial approval of participants following submission of the TREES concept was clarified. Language was added to explicitly address ART support of projects and flexibility on nesting arrangements. To be clear, projects may nest within the participant's ART program or may issue credits under a different program. TREES requirements to avoid double counting must be met. The types of safeguards information systems allowed under TREES was also clarified. We also noted that the same forest definition must be used for the entire crediting period. We also clarified the intent of the soil pool requirement to indicate that peat soils must be included. The types of remote sensing approaches allowed was also clarified, and the requirements were rearranged to better indicate which requirements applied to each remote sensing approach. The requirements for historical emissions factors were also clarified. The approach for determining whether the reversal mitigation factor relating to the interannual variability was also clarified. We clarified the language in several safeguards indicators to ensure better readability and clarity. And finally, it was clarified that the appeals process can apply to concerns about the validation process as well as the verification process. The consultation period for Trees 2.0 extends from February 1st until April 2nd for a total of 60 days. ART is soliciting comments from all interested stakeholders. We would ask that you submit comments to red@winrock.org. Following the end of the consultation period, the Secretariat will summarize all comments for the board to review in April. We anticipate that Trees 2.0 will be published in a final form for use in early May 2021. So that was a brief overview of all the new changes in 2.0. So thank you to everyone for participating today. I hope you found that information useful. In just a moment, I'm going to ask my colleague Jessica Arrigo to summarize the questions that have been coming in, and we will provide responses. As a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be available on the ART website soon. Thank you so much. And Jessica, I'll turn it over to you for questions.
That's great, Christy. Okay, so there are some questions. So I'll go ahead with the first one here. The first one is 2.5 million hectares seems very large for an Indigenous people scale threshold. Please explain why this number was selected.
Sure, that's a good question, definitely. So as I mentioned, it was really important to ART to provide a pathway for including Indigenous peoples while still adhering to the ART principle that requires us to ensure large scale and ambition. We selected the 2.5 million hectares to ensure alignment with the area thresholds for other subnational participants, although I would note that it is different in that 2.5 million hectares is total area, not just forest area, as we have for the subnational jurisdictions. It is also important to note that this will enable national participants to include IP territories in their subnational accounting areas in combination with jurisdictions, providing greater flexibility. We are, as I mentioned, very open to receiving comments and suggestions on this requirement during the consultation period, though, so we welcome any thoughts that stakeholders have on this.
Great, thanks, Christy. Okay, second question. Why, for the removals accounting, why does ART not consider forests, remaining forests in the approach, in the removals approach, since a lot of carbon is sequestered in intact forests as they grow?
Sure, another good question. So ART is not including forest remaining forests for the moment because we, and in consultation with others, were unable to identify a credible crediting level option that would ensure the additionality of the credits from those types of activities. We may be considering adding something in the future, but for now, we are not including it.
Okay. Great, thanks for that. Let's see, so another question, also related to removals. Why is a longer look back period, so a longer period where for a longer start date, not earlier start date, not allowed for removals, since removals activities take longer to produce credits?
Also an excellent question. We certainly looked at that. So we did consider whether a longer look back period for removals activity would make sense. However, we decided to allow the look back period, or I guess to be clear, the earliest allowable start date for removals to be aligned with the earliest possible start date for crediting for reduced emissions from deforestation and degradation. The Secretariat realized that a longer look back would actually be fairly complicated. So it would include a requirement that the participant demonstrate safeguards much further back in the past, and would also require them to demonstrate that emissions from deforestation were reduced below a crediting level in the past as well. So we decided to keep it consistent. We decided to keep it consistent with other crediting level approaches.
Great, thanks. Okay, so another one about removals. Can a jurisdiction join ART and only claim removals without monitoring the emissions from deforestation and degradation?
So currently under this draft, participants have to demonstrate that they reduced emissions from deforestation and degradation below the tree's crediting level before they would be eligible for crediting under removals. So with the current language, no, they would not be able to just join ART and claim removals crediting.
Okay, thanks. And how about for countries that meet the HFLD criteria? Are they eligible for crediting from removals?
So yes, they are definitely eligible provided that they can demonstrate that they've reduced their emissions from deforestation and degradation below the tree's crediting level. I'll try to be brief in my answers.
Okay, great. Okay, so switching over to a different topic. The question is, will ART require corresponding adjustments for purchases or transfers under the CORSIA program?
Sure, so ICAO actually requires that all units transferred for use under CORSIA have a corresponding adjustment. So we will definitely facilitate that. So it first requires a host country letter of authorization that attests that a future adjustment will be made. And then later we'll have to demonstrate by providing proof in a biennial transparency report to the UNFCCC. So details about transfers of arts credits for use under CORSIA are explained in detail in section 13. And then also in Annex B of Trees 2.0, that's the section that we added that I mentioned. I guess also to note that the art registry does have the functionality to label trees credits that have these host country letters of authorization, and also to indicate which have corresponding adjustments for them. This is available for any transfers or transactions that require or prefer corresponding adjustments, so not just CORSIA transfers.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so this is a question about nesting. Are offset projects allowed in countries that or jurisdictions that participate in ART?
So yes, offset projects are definitely allowed under ART, and the requirements for doing so have not changed in Trees 2.0. Trees continues to provide significant flexibility, so participants and projects can determine the arrangement that works best for them. Projects can be nested, as I mentioned, under the ART crediting level under an allocation arrangement agreed to by the stakeholders involved, or projects could issue credits under other standards. In those cases, the volumes issued under other programs would be subtracted from the ART issuance, though, to ensure no double counting occurred. There are also, I should mention, additional ways that the private sector can support jurisdictional REDD+ in addition to the traditional offset projects. We're actually currently working on a paper that will outline different models of public-private partnership that could be used to achieve increased ambition. We expect that paper to be available in early April, so be on the lookout for that.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so another question. Is it possible to submit comments, through the public consultation process regarding the MRV requirements under trees?
So good question. The Secretariat is only soliciting comments on the portions of Trees 2.0 that are new or changed. So we are not soliciting comments on sections where clarifications were made, but no changes were made to the requirements, like in section 4 for the MRV. If you look at the summary of changes document on the website, it indicates which sections are clarifications versus new or changed requirements. So that would be a great guide.
Okay, thanks for that, Christy. Okay, here's another. This is about the uncertainty deductions. Can you explain or go into a little bit more detail about how a jurisdiction can get some of those previous uncertainty deductions back over time? I think that they need to understand the process a little bit better.
Sure, I'd be happy to explain that. So again, the calculation is outlined in the standard, but we can cover it in a little more detail here. So with this new provision, at the end of each crediting period, a participant has the ability to calculate their uncertainty deduction based on the summed uncertainty of their emissions reductions and removals during the total period of ART participation. So this is calculated by summing the reference emissions minus the summed crediting period emissions. Where the uncertainty contributions to date exceed this new deduction number, additional trees credits will be issued to the participant to account for that difference. We added this provision to address the inherent issues with uncertainty calculations when you're doing them over a short time period, and we wanted to provide an opportunity really to reward participants who improved their uncertainty over time.
Okay, that is helpful. Okay, so here's another one. So is it possible to bundle numerous Indigenous territories or only a single Indigenous territory? Or is it that only a single Indigenous territory must have the 2.5 million hectare threshold?
Sure, so the arrangement is somewhat similar to the requirements for subnational jurisdictions. So for a single Indigenous territory to participate directly, the area threshold would have to be 2.5 million hectares. If a national government wanted to be the participant, they could combine multiple territories to reach the 2.5 million hectares, or they could combine some Indigenous territories with some jurisdictions to achieve the scale threshold as well. That's similar to the process that we had in place for subnational jurisdictions, but providing greater flexibility so that the territories could be included in addition to the jurisdictions.
Okay, I am just looking through here. Okay, so here is one. So there is one about the legal framework. So have any changes been made to the legal framework of the credits?
So no, we have not made any changes to the legal framework for ownership title or transferring since 1.0.
Okay, great. Just give me a moment here. Okay, there's another one here about the double counting requirements for CORSIA. They are listed in Annex B, and It says Annex B states requirements for avoiding double counting. Is this also the case for other sectors other than aviation?
Sure. So Annex B is only the requirements for CORSIA. So it only applies to CORSIA. Those requirements do not apply to any other sectors, no.
Okay. Let's see, just making sure. And also, I should note that if we don't get to all of the questions today, we will be able to respond to them via email later. So, and I know we've been answering some of them in the question and answer box. So I think some of you have already gotten your answers. So, okay, let me just quickly make sure. Okay, one more question here. Okay, so on removals, it appears that it appears from the standard that any natural regeneration happening over the crediting period could be credited if a country manages to reduce deforestation and forest degradation. Does that include regeneration on recently deforested lands? So the answer to that, I can just go ahead and do that one right now. Under the removals approach, any new regeneration and reforestation that occurred during the crediting period is eligible for crediting, provided that it exceeds the removals baseline, which is area based. Okay, and then let's see, here's another one. So section 5.3 states that the participant must have demonstrated emissions from deforestation and degradation in the most recently verified trees monitoring report. Does this mean a participant wouldn't be able to include removals in its initial submission? Or can emission reductions from deforestation and degradation without removals be demonstrated in the same submission? Christy, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So if I understand correctly, so yes, you could in your initial submission both show that you reduced emissions reductions beneath your crediting level and then qualify and quantify the removals during the same crediting period. The only one that can't be done is just submitting with the removals. We do require a demonstration that the participant is below their crediting level for deforestation and degradation. But certainly in your initial submission, you could include both if you qualify.
Okay. All right, thanks. There's another one here. What if the jurisdiction is not able to get the approval letter from the federal government due to political issues? So assuming that's the a letter of approval to join ART.
Sure. So if you look in the requirements of the various trees documents, you'll note that we do understand that that could be a lengthy process. So we do require an approval letter to eventually be obtained, but certainly in the initial submissions, if the subnational jurisdiction were to indicate what the process they're following to eventually get the approval letter would be, that it is sufficient to start.
Okay, that's great. Well, I think we're going to stop it there. I think we've answered quite a few questions, but for those of you who did not get answers, we will try very hard to respond to them in writing and contact you with the answers shortly. But we would really like to take this opportunity to thank you all for attending the webinar today. And of course, we are able to answer questions in email later as they occur to you. And we will also be posting a recording of this webinar to our website shortly. So feel free to check back and look for that recording. So
Excellent.
on
My
that
thanks
note,
as well. We
yeah.
appreciate you spending some time with us this morning and look forward to your comments. Excellent. Well, then thank everyone. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.